So, I just finished watching the 1966 film Persona for like the 8th or ninth time now. At this rate, I've practically lost count, and sadly not even Letterboxd can come to my aid, as my first viewing was well before I got the app. But I remember my first time as though it was yesterday. An experience on par with losing my virginity. It was pleasant, but left me a tad underwhelmed. There was an expectation, one I should have maybe not heaped onto myself, that this film would tick all my boxes to becoming a personal favourite. Now, 8 or 9 times later, I can confirm it got to that status I originally wanted it to get to all those years ago, like a self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm ashamed to admit, though, my most recent watch was very much a time-killing exercise. There was a football match taking place at 1:30am my time, and knowing I had nothing better to do, when I looked at my clock and saw the time was 12:10, the decision was already made for me as far as I was concerned. Maybe not the best idea, given I fell asleep and then went on to miss part of the football match. I didn't even finish the film in my next sitting. I'm probably the first human to watch Persona across 3 separate sit-downs. Part of the appeal of the film is its tight runtime, appropriately matching its addictively simple premise with an abundance of experimentation that is both alienating and disorienting. The runtime, when considering its surreal and abstract content, to me even suggests a nervousness, an apprehension of Ingmar Bergman, the film's director, to commit to something grander, not knowing how Persona would be received by audiences, nor possibly how he might feel about the project once it came to fruition. Or perhaps he just felt a slim 80 minutes was suitable for the story he wanted to tell. Having watched many of his films at this point, I'm kind of a big fan. I'm disappointed that Persona's blueprint was never used as the building blocks for something with more spectacle. But then maybe this singular style and tone doesn't belong in other kinds of films. Maybe it should be brought into the most art house of art house films, and that's all. I've never seen something like this one before or since by Bergman or anyone really. Maybe there's an explanation hidden somewhere there. Sure, he did heart-wrenching family dramas and coming-of-age epics, and Hour of the Wolf was sort of weird, as was Fanny and Alexander in moments, which is probably the closest he's come to recapturing some of that eerie essence, but really it's way more focused on the loss and grief of just Alexander, if we're being honest. There's barely any Fanny in the film. Persona is distinct, it's bold, it's raw and bare bones, yet it has a flair and brio, and most importantly, rewatchability.
These 4 battalions of artillery considerably increased the army's value.
Have you ever heard someone say every time they listen to a particular song they hear something different, or every time they watch a certain film they see something different? I often hear that, and to me it's like white noise, a buzz phrase. And I'm guilty of this too. Not every time, but often Persona is a member of this club for me, and interestingly enough, I find that the films I've watched the most amount of times are the ones I most often pick up on new secrets and nuggets of storytelling gold. It sounds crazy, I know, but films like this one, There Will Be Blood, 12 Angry Men...
Is it possible?
Not guilty.
I know these films like the back of my hand. I know the scene ordering, the plot beats, even as far as to say the progression of shots in most scenes. This is clearly helped by films with a longer average shot length, but when you know these films this well, you can focus less on the obvious and more on the unnoticeable. Which is why, the 9th time around, or 8th, it felt at times like I was watching a film I had never done so before, a really novel occurrence. Who would have thought the only time I've ever watched this film across 3 sittings would be the one that motivates me to produce my first video essay? Persona has density, but it's also a film, as I mentioned, that is stripped back and obscure as to the greater point, and I think it's this element that gives rise to a multitude of different interpretations for what's actually going on. All equally valid, all equally true. The power of suggestion and expressive visuals make for a rich canvas for extracting meaning and ideas. It's actually pretty insane how much feels unsaid for characters that talk in a monologue-like fashion, seemingly without a filter, and have no reservation or stopgap when confessing their deepest desires, fears, traumas. They just say what they feel. Well, one character does, in this film's case. If Persona had dialogue spoken in the English language, I might have a more exhausted reaction, but the harsh and tart tone of Swedish, at least to an Englishman anyway, just adds an extra layer to that strange, fantastical environment it inhabits. This film tells the story of one person who talks a lot and one person that hardly says a thing. These two characters are nurse Alma and actress Elisabeth Vogler. This is half the film's cast, the first tick in my favourite film criteria, a ridiculously short character list. If it can't be turned into a minimalist play, it's not a good film, don't even argue. Alma is without a surname, an interesting choice that gels well with my theory that Alma could have been anyone. She isn't predetermined or special, just unlucky, in my view anyway. Elisabeth's parasite-like behaviour forms the cornerstone of the amalgamating processes that take place in the film's fragmented second half. Therefore, she has to be the constant in all this, the thing you can't take out. Like the Nazis in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Everyone knows Indiana could have been anyone, it wouldn't have made a fucking difference to the outcome, so think of Alma as Indiana and Elisabeth as the Nazis, and that's basically the film in a nutshell. The two characters cross paths after the actress makes a conscious and voluntary decision to go mute and is placed under the nurse's care. The majority of the film is set in a remote summer home on the coast of a secluded island where these two spend time in each other's company. First an amiability, then followed by hostility, and finally some kind of reconciliation, twisted as that may be. The fascination of one to the other is mutual. There's a deep and curious attraction that exists. It compels them to each other, really, until that bond implodes. Betrayals are made, insecurities exploited, affronts uttered. It's a massive whirlwind of emotions and re-evaluations where the dynamics of the moods are carried with grace on the shoulders of longtime collaborator of Bergman's, Bibi Andersson, who plays Alma. She gets stuck with all the lines. Liv Ullmann, who plays Elisabeth, gets...
Nu ska du gå till sängs. Annars somnar du över bordet. Ingenting.
Not a lot, right? Though Ullmann's performance is largely reactive, there is undeniably something engrossing about watching a character somewhat designed to absorb information act as a mirror for Alma to essentially hold a conversation with herself. Elisabeth uses her physicality, most vitally the features of her face, to convey a reply. Bergman has always been a keen observer and surveyor of people's faces. The 4:3 aspect ratio serves as the perfect box to enclose and frame the most telling, revealing parts of our body, the ideal snapshot. The most revealing of which are the eyes, the window to the soul. Bergman often has shots where his actors break the fourth wall, and we get that priceless opportunity to glimpse into the fractured souls of his characters, an effective way of building a connection to them. It helps that his choice of actors, and incidentally his co-workers, is as sublime as his choice in girlfriends, which is only natural when both lists are exactly the same. My attention was drawn to how often those facial features that we admire as representative of good acting are the subject of mockings and abuse by characters in Bergman's films. Take this clip from Cries and Whispers.
Den fina breda pannan har fått 4 rispor ovanför vardera ögonbrynet. Nej, det kan du inte se i det här ljuset. Men det syns i skarpt dagsljus.
Charming, huh? I'm not even taking the piss either. Look at how turned on she is by having the amount of wrinkles above each brow counted. She also being the very talented Miss Liv Ullmann. As I mentioned, Ullmann has very little to work with in Persona dialogue-wise as a stark contrast to the bubbly Alma, but the insurmountable depth hidden behind the character's writing, the sentiments that are rendered exposed and deconstructed via Alma, does require more than just competent acting. The stray glances, the sinister glares, the resentment, the allure, the affection, it's serious range, and without the ability to verbally converse is impressive. Some of the most memorable instances in Ullman's entire performance actually take place without Alma as that instigating force. These are in dimly lit spaces with cold auras where only her thoughts and ruminations echo in her solitude. Well, near solitude. I guess you could argue a TV screen or a photo provides some level of presence, though inanimate, and these objects are also provokers of a sort. Both prompt Elizabeth to have some recoil, a mellow despair in one, and an overwhelmed fit of hysteria in the other. Elizabeth begins this scene by pensively and almost impatiently walking around a hospital room. The room itself I can't help but see as a fake set. It doesn't actually seem legit in the context of the film. It's just so plastic and rubbery, and the set design is so minimalistic, consisting of a bed, a TV and curtains. I wouldn't like to be a patient at this hospital. I see this and am reminded of sitcoms, a half-assed charade, and Elizabeth is an actress in the film, so there might be something there. I mentioned earlier the best films are the ones that could easily be turned into plays, and though I was half joking with this point, this scene gives me those vibes. I think there are segments, scenes that happen in the closing stages of Persona that transcend. Ones where the edges of the screen you're watching from are necessary to give the illusion of boundless scope. Having those exchanges, the likes you can see right now, take place on stage wouldn't quite translate with the same otherworldly tendency, in my opinion. The Alma absent moment that fascinates me the most is this one by far. It's towards the start of the film before the couple go to the summer house and we're still spending time in the hospital. Again, Elizabeth is reacting to a stimulus, this time an audible one by Bach. It's poignant and soothing, but laced with tragedy as your ears can't help but be taken in. Whether the music means something significant to Elizabeth or her past remains to be known, but she's clearly captivated, entranced. She's very still and her eyes are transfixed as I am transfixed on hers. Her potent gaze feels nearly invasive. It's unpleasant because it's someone that I don't entirely understand with a power I can't really quantify, and I feel a small semblance of fear as a result. Make no mistake, Elizabeth has a monstrous quality to her, and this feeds directly into my discomfort here. But the phase that really, and I mean really, sends shivers down my spine is the gradual depletion of light as darkness rolls across her face. The music turns that foreboding corner, and it's an effect so subtle that it's not immediately identifiable what's happening, but it becomes unignorable. The last thing to get engulfed are the twinkles in her eye, and that marks the end of the process. The transition is complete. I've seen people's take that this shows some emotional reaction, Elizabeth's torment being at first quelled by the music, and the darkness is a symbol of it eventually failing. I definitely don't think this is wrong, and maybe this is because I struggle with metaphors, but I see it as a very literal physical change. Those twinkles in her eyes come across as a pleading cry for help. The last remnants of her already debatable humanity fade, and she temporarily or permanently transforms into something malevolent. It's against her will. Through this lens, Elizabeth garners empathy, and there are moments throughout this film where my heart hurts for her, sandwiched by moments where she appalls me and I feel just how icy she can really be. The camera seizes every atom of this. As fresh as the experimentation in this film is, there are apparent masters at work on Persona, artists that have honed their craft to know what's effective, what isn't, and their fingerprints are all over this film. Sven Nykvist, another frequent collaborator of Bergman's, I'm surprised they didn't sleep together, is the all-too reliable cinematographer at work here. This might be the film most well-suited to the colours black and white I have ever seen, and it's completely thanks to him for that. Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho and David Lynch's Eraserhead are other films that come to mind when thinking about being well-suited to the black and white palette. Even another one of Bergman's films, The Seventh Seal, a film where conflict is derived from a competitive chess game where one of the players is death personified, is a great shout. But Persona's themes of duality, separate and whole, everything from the costume design to the set design is punctuated by the most extreme colours in existence we observe them with. I don't think filming in black and white was a deliberate decision, but rather a byproduct of the times. That isn't to say that if Bergman had the choice he would have done differently, just that I'm not really sure filming in colour had made its way to Sweden in the mainstream by the mid-60s. But I may be wrong. The scene of Elizabeth listening to Bach is an example of how darkness can be manipulated in this film to create a chilling atmosphere. But it doesn't stop there. Different to the role of darkness, light can be used to achieve similar effects. In the previous scene, Elizabeth dissolved into the background, dragged coercively into its void. Here, in a not dissimilar uneasiness to the viewer, Elizabeth emerges from the background instead in a ghost-like manner. I mean, seriously, this is incredible cinematography. She blends seamlessly with her surroundings, as if she's decayed wallpaper peeling off the walls. She's made herself part of this place. A subtle nod to how welcoming and remedying the environment has been for her. As she describes in her own words, in this house she feels her battered soul finally starting to straighten out. But I think it signifies something even greater and more ominous in Elizabeth's skulking and lurking. She's in control. It's omnipotence and territorial warnings. This space belongs to her and her only, like a dog pissing on the grass to announce its turf to the other dogs. And the scenes beforehand only further this. Alma is the vulnerable individual divulging secrets and subject to emotional turmoil as Elizabeth silently studies and speculates with meticulous attention. She wants to know everything about this person, even going as far as to watch her while she sleeps. And Alma is only too accommodating to abide, to her detriment as well. You see this as Elizabeth lures her out of bed, digging her fingernails into her, laying the groundwork together for what's to come. The stages the what's to come proceeds through are vague, as to be expected in a film of this nature. So vague that without knowing the film's direction, Elizabeth's actions in the first half of the film are compassionate and sensitive. Alma needs an ear and a shoulder to cry on. I've usually seen their relationship as 50-50, a mutually assured destruction implicitly made in writing between the two women. It's inevitable and out of their control, almost as if Bergman's the ever-seeing, all-knowing deity spinning the cogs behind the scenes. But on my most recent viewing, I felt, as opposed to realised, I've been doing Elizabeth a discredit, which is why she's been my utmost focus. I tend to have a fairly consistent way of examining amusing films like Persona, in that after watching them, I spend the minimum amount of time acceptable thinking about what lies beneath the surface, and then shut them away for another day. Films that are artsy and thought-provoking. I don't want to sit through an hour-long video on the ending of Mulholland Drive Explained, because I'd rather it remain a secret. I don't want the magic spoiled, because then a second viewing one day feels duller, it's less attractive, less fulfilling. But I also understand that part of loving something means wanting to know everything about it, to the point of near lunacy, and why it works so compellingly. The difference is that I don't love Mulholland Drive. I don't even think it's anything to write home about. Let's be honest here. And this film does permeate my thoughts all the time. It must do if I can watch it the amount of times I have and still mine those little nuggets of storytelling gold with my cerebral pickaxe I was talking about. I've alluded to the fact that the second half of this film is when shit gets weird. Really, really weird. I guess the musical equivalent is Hounds of Love, right? If you've listened to that album and you know when Cloudbusting ends and the ninth wave starts, the whole album just goes off the rails. Persona has a shift to the extreme that's just as unapologetic. It's jarring, really. Alma and Elizabeth have a serious falling out after Alma reads a letter Elizabeth wrote to her doctor imparting personal information Alma had told her in confidence. What starts as mild friction becomes a tear in the very fabric of their recently established friendship.
Except for the birds around the New England farm, and they gathered.
The climax of which is this scene. The use of the word scene is misleading. It's actually two scenes back to back, the same one shown twice. There is a very key difference between the two, however, that drastically changes the feeling that you get, what is evoked to the viewer. Alma delivers an incisive, piercing monologue to Elizabeth about her own son, who Elizabeth has cut ties with after going mute and being hospitalised. The camera films Elizabeth the first time round, and then Alma. Yet, the monologue is unchanged. It's emotionally charged and coordinated, and it will imprint itself on your mind. Bergman's justification for this avant-garde approach is that he filmed Anderson and Ullman each and couldn't choose which angle he preferred, so chose to include both in the final cut. He is such a tease. There's no way it's this simple. It's too purposeful and too essential to Persona's skeleton. It would be like removing a chunk of its spine. You don't show the same 5-minute scene twice sequentially based off indecision. You have to know it will work. It's the only way. It could blow the pace of the film completely out of the water, it's so risky. But it works. It works with confidence and pride. The thing that interests me far more is having to select which section goes first. Do you show Alma's incitement first or Elizabeth's reception? My rigid and very by-the-book brain tells me the natural order should be Alma initially, then Elizabeth. Talk first, listen after. It makes sense, wouldn't you agree? Where one would go left, Bergman goes right. Under a different guise, inquiring from a different angle, it makes total sense. When taking a step back, the interaction is, at its core, Alma telling Elizabeth about Elizabeth, in excruciating detail too. I think the subject is deeply personal, it's humiliating really. I think Elizabeth is mainly made to be seen as cruel here, and she portrays her apologetic shame quite well. I don't doubt for 1 second she's sorry on some level. Though reconnecting with her son is a slim possibility, she understands the grief he must feel and her active participation in that. Alma, now intrinsically linked to Elizabeth, could represent some sadistic or perhaps even masochistic sentiment, exposing hard truths. To take this in a similar vein, it could be Alma's way of punishing Elizabeth for her callous betrayals earlier in the film, but I see it as a study, even a test perhaps. My most recent viewing intrigued me as I focused on the inner demons of Elizabeth's black soul. The darkness washing over her face, the spectral demeanour, the quiet evaluations, the subtle impartings and intrusions, Alma literally being mistaken for Elizabeth by her blind fucking husband. The signs are indisputable now. Elizabeth has something inside her she needs to pass on, that eats her up and longs for more. She's grooming Alma, has groomed her, but she has to ensure she's ready to take on a persona. And what's a better way to understand this than to see what she's learned? I guess absorbed, to be more precise. Learned implies a teaching that I don't think has happened, at least not in a literal sense. Who the hell knows? Then the significance of the order being what it is now we get to hear the monologue first and then see it after. We're able to look closely and with the familiarity of the monologue's content already in our heads, study the manner in which it's delivered, not how it's received. The delivery is really the more imperative watch in my opinion. Alma's embodying characteristics are her generous attitude, her overall innocent and quite malleable demeanour, as well as her carefree though self-doubting outlook. Nowhere in that list, nor when watching this character, is the prospect of something devious proposed, until Elizabeth's first hex at least. Alma's corrupted cracks come forth the moment the intertwining starts. This culminates in what we see now. The alteration is on display in all its venom, making for a stark contrast to the persona she was introduced to us with. It's putrid, heartless, and maybe scariest of all, rehearsed. Evidently premeditated, evidently candid, and evidently bruising. I said that Elizabeth is not without empathy here. That's felt just as it's targeted. Alma speaks with such assurance, it's staggering to think she's speaking about someone else rather than herself. But this is precisely the point I'm trying to make. It's already taking over. It's a peculiar yet fascinating passage, steeped in ambiguity but so pertinent. The film's identity, not what it is without it, which is a sentence that could be said about every scene in this film, really. While I don't think Persona is flawless, it's one of those ones where I would be hard-pressed to find things to change. I would probably start by changing Elizabeth's son in the credits to simply boy, as it's very anti this film to write something like that. I can't believe for 1 second Bergman would sanction this, but maybe it wasn't up to him. Anyway, a question I like to ask myself when concerning the removal or trimming of scenes is whether what's in question reinforces the ideas of the film. Whether that's through plot progression or themes, character development, does it add something constructive? I really can't sing the praises of this film enough, and perhaps my largest is that everything feels important. Everything feels like it tells something about the characters, their relationship, how they grow, or more appropriately, rescind. It's not always outspoken, but translation can be wrought if you look carefully, or watch it 8 or 9 times. It's not altogether clear what Elisabeth's fate is at the end of this film. The penultimate time we see her is in some vegetated state, repeating nothing over and over on Alma's instruction. It has been passed on successfully. I have abundant respect for the film's writing, the conciseness of it all, and I don't mean compression, I mean more focus. There's a promise of something that's going to happen. The story delivers this, and then it doesn't hang around for spooning the following morning. It doesn't outstay its welcome. It is a nifty little experiment designed to explore what happens when two opposing entities collide. When they come together, will something new be born, or will one obliterate the other completely? I suppose the outcome is determined by what you experience watching it, and no one should bring that into disrepute. You make of the story what you want to.
I stepped out onto the midway. I was looking for the pirate ship.